Have you ever wondered why you feel like an alien in your own world? Imagine discovering that everything you've been told about being too much is actually evidence of something extraordinary that only 2% of the population possesses. Here's the shocking truth. What if your intensity, your sensitivity, your refusal to accept shallow answers aren't flaws to be fixed, but signs of a rare and powerful psychological type that Carl Jung called differentiated consciousness? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why Carl Jung believed that the very traits society criticizes might be the keys to your deepest purpose, and why most people will never understand what makes you truly special. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what if who you truly are doesn't fit the mold? What if your intensity, your sensitivity, your refusal to accept shallow answers aren't flaws to be fixed, but signs of a rare and powerful psychological type? If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own life, if people have called you too deep or too complicated, this isn't coincidence. According to Carl Jung's groundbreaking research into personality types, some individuals possess what he called differentiated consciousness, a way of experiencing reality that most people never develop. Here's what's fascinating. Jung discovered that these rare personalities often go through their entire lives thinking something is wrong with them, when in reality, they're operating at a level of psychological sophistication that's genuinely uncommon. But there's a catch, and I'll reveal what that is in just a moment. Today, we're exploring 8 unmistakable signs that you possess this rare personality type. If you recognize yourself in these patterns, it won't just change how you see your past, it might revolutionize your entire future. But first, let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed that your emotional reactions seem disproportionate to what others experience? There's a psychological reason for this that Jung uncovered, and it's not what you think. You experience emotional depth that others can't comprehend. Carl Jung discovered something remarkable about emotional intensity. He found that certain individuals don't just feel emotions, they experience what he called effectively toned complexes that create profound psychological resonance. In simpler terms, you don't just have feelings, feelings move through you like ocean currents, deep and transformative. Here's what Jung realized that most people miss. This isn't emotional instability, it's emotional sophistication. But why does society try to convince you otherwise? When you feel deeply, you're not overreacting. You're accessing layers of psychological experience that most people have learned to suppress. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Your emotional intensity isn't a burden. It's a form of psychological radar that detects what others can't see. You feel the unspoken tension in rooms. You sense when someone's smile doesn't match their eyes. You carry the emotional undercurrents of every interaction because your psyche is wired for depth, not surface-level pleasantries. But here's where it gets interesting and where most people with this trait make a critical mistake that keeps them stuck. Jung identified a specific pattern in how emotionally deep people sabotage their own gift. The world tells you to tone it down, to be more reasonable, to stop making everything so dramatic. But Jung understood that when you suppress this emotional depth, you don't become normal. You become neurotic. You start experiencing what he called psychological splitting, where part of you knows the truth while another part tries to conform. This is why you've probably felt exhausted trying to be someone you're not. But what if I told you that Jung discovered a way to transform this emotional intensity from a burden into your greatest strength? I'll share that technique in sign number 6. You question everything with unrelenting curiosity. According to Carl Jung, most people live what he called unconscious lives. They accept social programming without examination. But you can't help but dig deeper. Jung would have recognized you as someone with an active thinking function that refuses to accept surface explanations. Here's what's crucial. Jung discovered that people who question everything aren't being difficult. They're being psychologically honest. But there's a hidden cost to this honesty that most people don't realize until it's too late. You don't just ask what, you ask why. Why do people stay in relationships that make them miserable? Why do we accept systems that don't serve us? Why do we pretend that shallow conversations are meaningful connection? Your mind is constantly seeking truth beneath appearances. Jung called this the transcendent function, the psychological ability to see beyond current limitation. While others accept the status quo, you're already envisioning what could be different, what could be better, what could be more authentic. But here's the paradox Jung identified. The more clearly you see, the more isolated you can become. Why? Because your questions threaten other people's comfortable illusions. When you ask deep questions, you're not just seeking answers. You're challenging the psychological defenses that keep people feeling safe in their limitations. This is why you've probably been called cynical or negative. When you're actually being courageously honest, Jung discovered something fascinating about people like you. You have what he called prophetic consciousness. You see where things are heading before others do. This gift comes with the responsibility I'll reveal in the final sign, and it might surprise you. You've developed fierce independence as psychological survival. Carl Jung said the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. You've learned to do exactly this, not by choice, but by necessity. According to Jung's research, people with rare personalities often develop what he called individuated consciousness earlier than others, usually through adversity. Here's what Jung understood that most therapists miss. Your independence isn't a defensive mechanism, it's an achievement, but society will try to convince you it's a problem. And here's why that's dangerous. You've learned through painful experience that depending on others for your sense of worth is psychological quicksand. So you built yourself. You stood up, often alone, and created an identity that couldn't be taken away by someone else's opinion or absence. Jung called this process individuation, the psychological journey toward becoming whole. Most people never complete this journey because it requires facing what Jung termed the shadow. All the parts of yourself you've been taught to reject. But here's where it gets complex. Your independence attracts people who want to possess it and repels people who feel threatened by it. Jung identified a specific pattern in how independent personalities navigate relationships. And understanding this pattern changes everything. You don't need someone to complete you because you've done the psychological work of becoming complete. This means you don't seek relationships from desperation. You seek them from choice. You don't want someone to save you. You want someone to stand beside you as you both continue growing. Jung discovered something profound about people who achieve true independence. They become magnets for both authentic love and manipulative control. The key is knowing the difference. And I'll show you Jung's method for identifying this in sign number 7. Your solitude isn't loneliness. It's sanctuary. It's where you remember who you are beneath all the roles and expectations. And that's self-acknowledge. Jung said it's the foundation of all psychological health. You possess intuitive awareness that borders on psychic. Carl Jung revolutionized psychology when he identified intuition as a legitimate psychological function. He said, intuition is perception via the unconscious that brings forth ideas, images, possibilities, ways out of a blocked situation by a process that is mostly unconscious. Here's what Jung discovered that science is only now proving. Some people's nervous systems are wired to pick up information that others miss entirely. But this gift comes with a burden that can destroy relationships if you don't understand how to manage it. You don't just observe people, you read their psychological state. You notice the micro-expressions, the energy shifts, the words they don't say. Jung would have recognized this as evidence of what he called active imagination, the ability to perceive beyond the obvious. When someone says they're fine, but their body language screams distress, you can't unsee it. When there's tension in a room that everyone else seems to ignore, you feel it in your bones. This isn't paranoia, it's psychological sensitivity operating at a high level. But here's Jung's warning. If you don't learn to protect this sensitivity, it will exhaust you. He identified a specific technique that allows intuitive people to maintain their awareness without absorbing everyone else's psychological chaos. According to Jung, people with strong intuitive function often become unconscious therapists. They end up doing emotional labor for everyone around them. You regulate conversations, diffuse tension, and carry unspoken pain because you can't help but perceive it. Jung made a startling discovery about intuitive personalities. They often lose themselves in the process of understanding others. There's a specific psychological trap that catches almost everyone with this trait, and recognizing it is crucial for your well-being. The danger is that you become so skilled at reading others that you forget to check in with yourself. You become externally focused, constantly scanning for emotional data while your own needs go unmet and unexpressed. But when Jung worked with highly intuitive individuals, he found they could transform this sensitivity from a burden into a superpower. The secret lies in understanding what he called psychological boundaries, and I'll reveal this technique in just a moment. Before we continue, I need to tell you something that might shock you. Less than 1% of people who watch psychology videos actually apply what they learn. But here's what I've discovered. The people who subscribe and actively engage with this content are the ones who transform their lives completely. If you're serious about understanding your rare personality type and unlocking your full potential, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't just watch. Become part of a community that celebrates psychological depth. Because what I'm about to reveal in the next signs could change everything about how you see yourself and your relationships. You crave meaning over social acceptance. Carl Jung observed, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but what if being true to yourself means rejecting everything society tells you to want?" Jung discovered that certain personalities are psychologically incapable of living inauthentic lives. Here's what Jung realized about people like you. You don't choose meaning over popularity, your psyche demands it. But this creates a specific type of psychological conflict that can be devastating if you don't understand what's happening. You've probably tried living for external validation. Maybe you followed the script, said the right things, played the expected role. But Jung would have recognized the symptoms immediately, that gnawing emptiness, that sense of betraying something essential, that quiet desperation beneath the applause. According to Jung, when you live against your psychological type, you don't just feel uncomfortable, you develop what he called neurotic symptoms. Your psyche literally rebels against inauthenticity. Jung made a disturbing discovery. Most people never experience genuine meaning because they're too afraid of social rejection, but people like you face a different challenge, one that's both harder and more rewarding. You can't pretend that shallow goals matter. You can't get excited about achievements that lack substance. You can't build relationships based on convenience rather than connection. Your psychological makeup won't allow it. This is why you've probably felt like an alien in your own culture. But Jung identified something remarkable about people who prioritize meaning. They become evolutionary catalysts for human consciousness. When you refuse to settle for less than authentic connection, you force others to confront their own inauthenticity. When you ask the questions others avoid, you create space for truth. When you live according to your values rather than your fears, you give others permission to do the same. But here's Jung's most important insight about meaning-driven personalities. You have a psychological responsibility that goes beyond personal fulfillment. I'll reveal what that responsibility is in the final sign, and it might change how you see your entire life purpose. You've outgrown people and environments that once fit. Carl Jung said, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents. But what happens when you refuse to live an unlived life? What happens when you grow beyond the psychological limitations of your environment?" Jung discovered something profound about psychological growth. It's often a solitary journey, but there's a specific type of grief that comes with evolution, and understanding this grief is crucial for your continued development. You've likely experienced the painful realization that people who once knew you don't anymore. Not because you've become difficult or superior, but because you've shed layers of conditioning that no longer serve you. Jung called this process psychological death and rebirth. Here's what most people don't understand about outgrowing relationships. It's not a choice you make. It's a consequence of becoming authentic. But Jung identified a way to navigate this transition that honors both your growth and your past connections. The friends who knew you when you were shrinking, when you were people-pleasing, when you were suppressing your truth, they remember that version of you. And sometimes they want that version back because it felt safer, more predictable, easier to understand. But you can't go back. Jung understood that psychological evolution is irreversible. Once you've seen behind the curtain of social conditioning, once you've tasted authentic living, you can't return to unconscious conformity. Jung made a startling observation about people who outgrow their environments. They often experience what he called the dark night of the soul, a period of profound loneliness that tests their commitment to authenticity. This isn't ordinary loneliness. It's existential isolation, the recognition that your path is unique, that your perspective is rare, that your growth might mean leaving behind everything familiar. But Jung discovered something beautiful about people who successfully navigate this transition. They attract relationships of extraordinary depth and authenticity. The key is understanding his concept of psychological resonance. How authentic people find each other. When you stop performing and start being, when you stop shrinking and start expanding, when you stop apologizing for your depth and start owning it, something shifts in your entire relational field. You offer profound presence in a distracted world. According to Carl Jung, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But what if you're the type of person who creates transformation simply by showing up authentically? Jung identified a rare quality that some people possess, the ability to create what he called psychological holding space. If you have this gift, you already know how much it costs you, but you might not realize how rare and valuable it truly is. When someone speaks to you, they feel seen in a way that's uncommon. You don't just listen to their words, you perceive their underlying emotional state. You don't offer quick fixes, you offer deep witnessing. You don't rush to judgment, you create space for truth to emerge. Jung understood that this level of presence is actually a form of psychological healing. In your company, people remember what it feels like to be human, complex, contradictory, worthy of understanding. But here's Jung's crucial insight. People with this gift often exhaust themselves by giving it too freely. He identified specific psychological boundaries that allow empathetic people to maintain their depth without depleting themselves. You've probably found yourself in the role of unofficial therapist, emotional anchor, or safe harbor for others. While this makes you invaluable, it can also make you invisible. You become so skilled at holding space for others that you forget to ask for space to be held yourself. Jung discovered something important about highly empathetic personalities. They often develop what he called helper syndrome, a pattern of unconscious self-sacrifice that ultimately serves no one. The work isn't to stop caring or to close your heart. The work is to learn discernment, to understand who deserves access to your emotional presence and who has earned the right to reciprocate. When Jung worked with people who possessed natural therapeutic presence, he found they needed to learn a specific skill that transformed their relationships entirely. I'll share this skill in the final sign because it's the key to maintaining your gifts without losing yourself. You sense a larger purpose that you can't yet define. Carl Jung said, your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. If you felt a persistent sense that you're meant for something more than the ordinary, Jung would have recognized this as what he called the transcendent function, your psyche's drive toward individuation and purpose. Here's what Jung discovered about people with undefined but urgent purpose. They're not delusional or grandiose. They're responding to what he called archetypal calling. But there's a specific way this calling can become distorted, and understanding this is crucial. You felt it, that restless knowing that you have something to contribute, something to build, something to say. It might not be clear yet, but it's undeniable. Jung understood this as evidence of what he called creative potential seeking expression. This isn't about fame or recognition, it's about alignment, the psychological necessity of living in harmony with your deepest nature. Jung found that people who ignore this calling often develop what he termed neurotic symptom, anxiety, depression, a sense of meaninglessness. But here's Jung's most profound insight about purpose-driven personalities. Your calling isn't just personal, it's transpersonal. You're not just here to fulfill yourself, you're here to serve the evolution of consciousness itself. Jung believed that individuals with rare personalities serve as bridges between the unconscious and conscious realms of human experience. Through your depth, your questions, your refusal to accept shallow answers, you help humanity grow. This is why you can't settle for ordinary. This is why surface-level connections feel empty. This is why you'd rather be alone than pretend. Your psyche knows you have work to do, and that work requires authenticity, depth, and courage. But Jung also warned about the inflation that can come with recognizing your purpose. The key is holding both humility and power, understanding that you're special without believing you're superior. Carl Jung spent his entire career studying personalities like yours. He called people with these traits the differentiated individuals, who have developed psychological complexity that allows them to see, feel, and understand at levels most people never reach. If even half of these signs resonated with you, you're not just different, you're part of what Jung called the leading edge of human consciousness. You're one of the people pushing our species toward greater awareness, deeper truth, more authentic connection. Yes, it's lonely sometimes. Yes, it's misunderstood. Yes, it requires more courage than most people will ever need. But Jung believed that people like you are essential for humanity's psychological evolution. Your sensitivity isn't a weakness, it's a superpower. Your intensity isn't too much, it's exactly what the world needs. Your refusal to settle isn't difficult, it's brave. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." You're learning to do exactly that, and in doing so, you're giving others permission to do the same. Here's what I need you to do right now, and it's more important than you might think. Drop a comment below and tell me which of these signs hit you like a lightning bolt. But here's the thing, when you share your story, you're not just helping me understand my audience better. You're potentially saving someone else who feels exactly like you do. Think about it. Someone else watching this video might be questioning their sanity, wondering if they're broken, feeling completely alone in their psychological complexity. Your comment could be the validation they desperately need. Your story could be the bridge that helps another rare soul realize they're not alone. So don't just watch and leave. Share which sign resonated most deeply with you. Tell us about your journey with these traits. Your vulnerability could change someone's life. And if this video helped you understand yourself better, share it with someone who needs to remember their own psychological rarity. Remember, you're not too much, the world is too little, and you knew that people like you are the ones who change that.